Hola, buenos días, buenas tardes, o buenas noches, and welcome to today's video. The imperfect subjunctive, probably the hardest concept for Spanish learners to master. The subjunctive mood in and of itself is extremely difficult for us to understand as English speakers. And then when you throw it in the past tense, it gets even more confusing. So remember, in Spanish, the subjunctive is not a tense, it is a mood. We have three different moods in Spanish. The indicative, which we use the most, it's things of fact, like yo hablo, that's indicative mood, it's a fact. The subjunctive, which would be doubt, okay, things of uncertainty, which in this case, we're going to be looking at it in the past tense. And then we also have the imperative, which is essentially commands in Spanish. Well, let's take a look. Si tuviera más dinero, viajaría por el mundo. If I had, or if I were to have more money, I would travel the world. So you wouldn't say si tenía if I had, right? Tenía being the regular indicative imperfect. Si tenía, we need to say si tuviera. The idea here is that this is an unlikely event, or it can also be something that's expressing doubt in the past. Si tuviera más dinero, viajaría por el mundo. If I were to have more money, then I would travel around the world. Okay, so like I said, this refers to previous experiences or unlikely events. Okay, now, how do we form this? It's relatively easy, and the nice thing is that all of the endings are exactly the same for AR, ER, and IR verbs. So all we do is we take a verb and we put it in its third person preterite, so the third person plural. So for example, ellos hablaron. For example, ellos hablaron. We're going to cut off the ron, and then we'll add on the new ending. So in this case, it would be hablara, hablaras, hablara, habláramos, and hablaran. Now, we have two different endings that we can choose. We have hablara, for example, or we have another one which would be hablase. I never use this, and truthfully, I don't even know if I'd be able to use it correctly when speaking with people. Here in Mexico, I almost never hear this kind of ending, but there are other endings, and potentially people use them more in Spain. However, in Mexico, we would just say hablara, hablaras, hablara, habláramos, and hablaran. Okay, so these other endings, I wouldn't worry about too much if you're interested in traveling around Latin America. However, they are good to know in case you hear them and you get confused as to what was that, right? If you hear fuese, for example, instead of fuera, you're like, what was that? What was the fuese? Okay, it's the same exact thing, and there's just two endings. Why? I don't know. The Spaniards decided that was going to be a good idea, and so we have two different kinds of endings. Okay, so now let's take a look at a bunch of different examples. Ella quería que tú hablaras conmigo. Ella quería que tú hablaras conmigo. She wanted you to talk with me or to speak with me. Now, the reason I put this little red line under the a is because notice how I'm not saying hablarás or hablarás, I'm saying hablarás, hablarás, okay? So in Spanish, the natural emphasis on a word falls on the second to last vowel, which in this case would be this a right here, hablarás. Don't say hablarás, because if you say that, it sounds like you're speaking in the future tense. Tú hablarás, you will speak. Okay, so hablaras, really important to get that right. Ella quería que tú hablaras conmigo. She wanted you to talk to me. And it wasn't a guarantee that you were going to talk with me. There was doubt, and therefore we'll use the subjunctive. Trust me, if this is trickier for you, don't worry, because most students get really confused by this. This was actually the last thing that I learned in Spanish, and it took me a long time to get it down. So don't stress out too much if this is still tricky for you. Si fuera tú, no lo haría. Si fuera tú, no lo haría. If I were you, I wouldn't do it. If I were you, I wouldn't do it. Okay? So in this case, we won't say si yo era tú, because then it would sound like I'm saying literally, if I were you. It's tricky. I don't know how to describe this to you, but if I was saying era, that would be something of fact. But I'm not you. Therefore, we'll use a subjunctive. Si fuera tú, no lo haría. It's very, very common to see the conditional tense being used with the imperfect subjunctive, okay? Remember, the conditional is just the idea of I would do this, but this. You would do this, but this. Okay, so like we saw, si fuera tú no lo haría, or if I had more money, then I would travel around the world. Okay, it's very normal to see the conditional being used with the imperfect subjunctive. Next, es bueno que él se casara. Es bueno que él se casara. It's good that he got married. Okay, it's good that he got married. Now, the idea of es bueno que, that is my opinion and my feeling. Therefore, we use a subjunctive, and we're talking about it in the past because he already got married. It's very important that you understand how to use a subjunctive mood in the present tense first before trying to master this, because if you don't have the subjunctive mood in the present tense down, then I think this is going to be even trickier, okay? So focus on getting the present tense subjunctive down first, and then taking a look at this stuff if it's still confusing you, okay? Also, a little side note, remember, when we write el, we have to put an accent over it if we want to say he. If you don't, and you just get rid of it, it sounds like you're saying the, which is the article, okay? So we want el, he, okay? They both have the same pronunciation, but in writing, we just use the accent to let us know the difference there. When we're speaking to someone, how do we know the difference? Context clues, okay? And finally, buscaba una casa que tuviera alberca. Buscaba una casa que tuviera alberca. I was looking for a home that had a pool, or that were to have a pool. It wasn't a guarantee that I was going to find a home with a pool, and therefore we use tuviera. Just like we would use tenga in the present tense. Yo busco, or yo estoy buscando una casa que tenga alberca. That might have a pool, that may have a pool. It's not a guarantee that I'm going to find a house with a pool, and therefore we will use a subjunctive. Okay, I know this is very confusing, and this took me a long time to master. Like I said, this is probably the most tricky concept to get down in the entire Spanish language. So if you're watching this video and you're understanding this and you're using this already, hats off to you. Great job. Well, muchas gracias por ver este video. Por favor, si quieres aprender más español conmigo, ve a mi página web, SpanishWithNate.com. I have a free 7-day course on there, and I have a bunch of different courses, a beginner course, my full academy, and I also have one-on-one tutoring if you're interested in that. Bueno, muchas gracias por ver este video. Espero que hayas aprendido algo nuevo y nos vemos en el próximo video. Hasta luego.